All right, everyone. So we will go ahead and get started. There may still be people that will trickle in as we're going through the meeting, and that is okay. I just wanted to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded. This recording will be shared after this meeting is over, sometime tomorrow or potentially early next week. So it will be available online for folks to watch that weren't able to attend in person. Before we get started, I just wanted to do some introductions of staff that are on the call right now, go quickly through the agenda and run through some meeting mechanics before we get into the presentation. So my name is Lily Coyle. I am the Special Projects Coordinator for the Division of Forestry and Fire Protection. Thank you very much for attending tonight and for your engagement on the meeting that we are hosting, gauging public interest in establishing a state forest on the Kenai Peninsula. We also have Diane Campbell with us. She is the Kenai Area Forester, Geneva Preston, our forest planner, Greg Palmieri, our Coastal Region Forester, and then Mike Cooney, our Good Neighbor Authority Forester. So those folks are on the call. Geneva will be helping manage the chat, and then they will all potentially be available for answering questions later on. So in terms of the agenda tonight, we're going to go ahead and give a presentation, and then there will be an opportunity for Q&A and public comment. I do want to let folks know that comments shared during this meeting will be recorded as official public comment, and that we are still going to be accepting written public comments after the meeting tonight through 5 p.m. on January 16th. So even after this meeting, comments can still be submitted in writing by email or mail. So in terms of meeting mechanics, Geneva is going to go ahead and share some resources in the chat. She's going to share a link to the project website that has some more information on this proposal, as well as a link to the public notice that notice these meetings. There's a lot more information in that on how to submit public comment, a PDF copy of the agenda and the presentation so that you can view those later. We're also working on getting a copy of the presentation put on that project website. That should be up there tomorrow, so folks will be able to download the PDF of the presentation or just view it right online. And then if you're having issues accessing those PDFs she's put in the chat, feel free to put your email in the chat and she can send you an email with the resources. And then I see that a lot of folks are just dialing in. You can also just additionally send an email to stateforest@alaska.gov and we can get you those resources. All right, so on that note, I'm gonna turn it over to Diane Campbell, the Kenai Area Forester, to start the presentation.
Thanks, Lily. Let me cue things up here. I'm Diane Campbell. I'm the area forester for the Kenai Kodiak Area State Division of Forestry and Fire Protection. And let's get you guys a presentation here to explain why we're here and what we're looking to do. All right.
Diane, go ahead and click. Yeah, there you go.
I got it. Finally, I'm a little bit technologically challenged here. All right, so tonight we're here to talk about the potential of a state forest on the Kenai Peninsula. And we want to start off by saying there has been no proposal. There is no proposal written at this time. This is strictly an outreach to get community interest and to inform the community of what we're thinking, what a forest is, how it operates, and why we think it would be important for the Kenai. So our purpose, why we're here, the Division of Forestry and Fire Protection is soliciting public and stakeholder input to gauge whether or not there's interest and public support for the establishment of a state forest on the Kenai to secure long-term investment in Alaska's forest resource. And the goal of these meetings is to explain what the state forest is, how it's managed, and how it differs from general state lands, and to get you guys' feedback on that information that you get. So a main thing to remember is that only the legislature can create a state forest. Public input will inform whether or not we develop a proposal in the future, and no active proposal at this time, as I've said. So the Division of Forestry and Fire Protection, we want a state forest. That's great. We cannot do it without going through getting community involvement, community comment, community support. And then if that community support is there, we decide to write a proposal. We send that proposal to the legislature, and only the legislature can create that state forest. So this is a long and involved process that takes many steps. So why now? I know a lot of this notice was seemed like it came on pretty quick. The state of Alaska is working to promote active forest management and support state's timber history while continuing to allow for other uses such as the recreation, the fishing, and what we'll call multiple uses, which we're going to talk about in another slide a little bit later. The state and the division leadership have emphasized the importance of both strengthening Alaska's forest product industry and improving the state's ability to conduct reforestation projects. So it's not all about cutting the trees down, it's about putting the trees back as well and having a healthy forest industry. Designated a state forest, it can allow this work to occur more effectively than on general state lands. And we're gathering the public perspective now before any proposals developed, as I said, so that we can understand community priorities, concerns, and questions, and the level of support. Public input during this early stage will help shape whether the division recommends moving toward the development of the proposal in the future. So in the photo on the top, you see them looking at the lumber. This is, we had a lumber grading bill passed in 2023, and it allows Alaska mills to locally produce dimensional lumber, which can now be used in the construction of homes. And in the past, that couldn't be done because it wasn't graded lumber. So we're moving forward in the industry. And then the lower picture is small mills locally produced house logs from the Tanana Valley State Timber in the North Pole. So our industry is moving, and especially up in the larger forests, and we would like to see that return on the Kenai. So let's talk about what's here currently. The Alaska's designated state forests. About 2% of Alaska's state-owned lands are in 3 designated state forests. In 1982, the legislature established 286,000-acre Haines State Forest surrounding the Chilkoot, Chilkat, and Farabee River drainages in the community of Haines and Klukwan. The next year, it created 1.8 million acre Tanana Valley State Forest that stretches from Manly to Tok. And in 2010, Governor Parnell signed House Bill 162 establishing the Southeast State Forest. In May 2025, legislation was introduced to expand the Tanana Valley State Forest by designating roughly 600,000 acres of additional state land. And in addition to these 3 designated state forests, much of the state's public domain land is available for multiple use, including forest management. So for context, the state and the Department of Natural Resources have long considered proposing a Susitna Valley forest. And as far as we're aware, a Kenai State Forest has not been publicly discussed during the Division Mining Land and Water area planning or other official public scoping efforts. So this is the first time this has come forth and is out for public review or public comment. So what is a state forest? The state forest is, as I said, a legislatively designated area, and it's established for the purpose of timber management, including production, utilization, and regeneration. It remains state land and is permanently retained in public ownership. And that's exactly what we mean. Permanently remain in state ownership, which means it's still managed for timber, it's still managed for multiple use, it still allows access for recreation. It is still useful, it's still used for the people. The primary management goal, of course, I said, is timber production, regeneration, and active management, but we're still maintaining opportunities for recreation, hunting, fishing, and other public uses. Once a forest is established, management occurs under a forest management plan developed through public, stakeholder, and interagency engagement. The Forest Resource and Practices Act is there to protect the fish habitat and the water quality through coordination with the Division of Forestry and Fire Protection, ADF&G, and DEC. We all work together to keep those habitats clean and clear. And as I mentioned, multiple use and sustained yield. This means the forest supports many uses, but long-term timber management remains the foundational purpose. So in these photos, the timber sale up on the Tanana Valley State Forest is your upper picture, and the lower pictures show some of the multi-use on the Tanana Valley State Forest. You have the snow machiners, the snow bikers, people walking dogs, trappers use those areas. And as I said, it all stays open for public access. So some of the multiple uses, and these are the other beneficial uses, as we mentioned. Motorized, non-motorized access, the hunting, fishing, recreation, trapping, subsistence, and of course, forest products and harvesting and wood utilization, which is one of our prime goals. But it's also, it's not, a state forest is not a park. It's going to allow a broad range of uses, including forest products and the access. And these uses occur alongside recreation, hunting, fishing, and tourism, as I said. And the Forest Management Plan identifies compatible and incompatible uses, helping to guide how different activities occur across these landscapes. And we'll talk about the planning and the steps in the planning process here in a little bit. In some areas, such as research sites or experimental forests, certain uses might be limited to protect research integrity, but overall, the management intent is to support many uses, but long-term forest stewardship and timber productivity remain central to our goal. So as I said, if it becomes a state forest, it becomes permanent state land, and that designation will provide a long-term certainty for the state, the industry, and the local communities by retaining the forest in state ownership. This helps protect our investments in reforestation, forest roads, and supporting infrastructure, which takes decades to realize returns. So think in the lifespan of a tree, not a season, not a project. The state forest helps us think for generations ahead, because a tree grown to sawtimber size can take 80 to 120 years to grow. And without assured long-term forest status, this investment becomes risky. To put the time and the energy into building the infrastructure and planting the trees, and possibly have that land be redesignated to another use other than forest use, that's a lot of cost that we put into that land that we would like to retain. So a designated forest allows investors, mills, and forest professionals to plan confidently across the generations rather than in short cycles. And the stability can support year-round and seasonal jobs, encouraging wood product business development and strengthen a local renewable forest economy. So a state forest is a working forest for the next 100+ years. And I know in a lot of our meetings, people have said they're concerned. They walk in the woods, they take their kids in the woods, they take their grandkids in the woods, and that's exactly what we want. We want to have a forest that's here for generations that we can continue to take our family out into and their family out into, and that it's there for us for a long, long time. So these photos are pretty, in your top photos, you have an old stand of Sitka spruce and hemlock that's over on the Eastern Peninsula on the Seward side. Your middle one there is underneath there, a regen survey. In the center, top regen survey, and in the top right, a seedling that was on the Bear Lake sale over in Seward. That Bear Lake sale was a small sale that occurred in 2024. And when we went and walked that, and it was a lot of old, tall timber, when we went and walked that this summer, by opening up that canopy, there was already seedlings sprouting in that area. So that is going to recover nicely. It's going to reforest itself nicely, and it's a really nice little place to go. Bottom forester, bottom photo, there's a forester here out on the Tanana Valley State Forest, and then Letts spruce on the Kenai, and a Letts spruce at a trail that's down in Anchor Point on the Kenai. The Forest Management Plan, primary framework. Okay, this is where we start getting down to it. The designation provides long-term certainty, as we said, for the state, industry, and local communities by retaining the forest in state ownership. And this helps protect the investments, as we said, of forest roads, infrastructure, and things that can take decades to realize that return. Yep. Sorry, 1 second here. I got my slides and my papers mixed up here. Okay. There we go. All right, the Forest Management Plan is the foundation for how the state forest is operated. It sets a specific direction for that forest. Statutes, regulations establish what must be done. The plan explains how management goals would be approached locally. And the public and stakeholders have 2 formal opportunities to contribute. There's a scoping period during the plan development, a public review and comment on the draft plan before adoption, and some forests may include a citizen advisory committee, as in the Tanana Valley State Forest, which can provide ongoing input. And remember, the forest management plan doesn't occur until after public input happens, a proposal is written, the legislature decides to move forward and create the forest. Then we develop the forest management plan. So our state forest is managed, as we said, multiple use and sustained yield, and we keep touching on that. Alaska's constitution requires renewable resource, including forests, to be managed on the sustained yield principle. Sustained yield means timber harvest occurs gradually over time, never exceeding what the forest can regrow. We're not going to go out and clear cut our state forest. We're only going to take what we can grow back. The goal is long-term forest management with continuous reforestation, stand improvement, and age class diversity. So when the beetles struck the peninsula and we lost a lot of our mature white spruce to the beetles, a more diverse stand that had diverse age groups survived the beetle attacks better than those mature stands. So by working through these and having different age classes, it creates habitat for different types of animals, different types of birds, and it also makes a stronger forest to keep away from issues such as the beetles. Multiple use means forests support timber, but also recreation, hunting, fishing, tourism, subsistence, and public access. And the state forest is a use-oriented system. It's built to maintain a working forest across generations and also to have continual public use. So how's a state forest managed? Active forest management, what really happens on the ground. Active management is a science-based and intentional, not passive. Reforestation and thinning support ongoing timber supply and long-term forest health. Roads and access infrastructure reduce wildfire response time and enable safe firefighting strategies. And diverse stand ages improve wildlife habitat, increase climate resilience, and maintain productivity across the state. So that's one thing that folks don't realize is these forest roads that we put into the state forest. Yes, we can get in and get the timber out, and it creates access for people to go in and recreate and do things. But it also helps create fire breaks and allow us to do some fuels work and allow access in for our firefighters. If we do have a fire incident in those areas, it allows them to get in there quicker and hopefully suppress that fire faster. Alaska Forest Resources and Practices Act. It's the forest management law, which governs commercial timber harvest across and access and reforestation on state and private municipal lands. So it's the core law that governs forest operations, how commercial timber is harvested, the reforestation, the timber access, and how they're all carried out, and applies to state, private, and municipal lands. And the federal agencies must meet or exceed these same standards when they manage forests. 3 agencies implement it collaboratively. Fish and Game ensures fish habitat is protected. DEC oversees the water quality and protections. And the Division of Forestry and Fire Protection regulates forest practices, ensuring operations are in compliance. And the purpose of FERPA is to strike a balance supporting Alaska's timber industry and economy while also protecting water quality and fish habitat. It does not just regulate harvest, it also ensures forests are regenerated and remain productive over time. It ensures that after harvesting, forests are reforested within required timeframes, which helps maintain the long-term forest health and future timber supply. providing certainty. Landowners and operators know what is required, and the public knows how resources are then protected. So the public process, transparency, and public review at every step. So as you look at the planning pyramid, the regional and the DNR plans. So the regional plan, we have the Kenai Kodiak Area Plan. The Kenai plan was written in 2001, and it lists the designations for each of the land types for either recreation, habitat, forest use. And that's the regional plan that we go to and utilize when we're managing our land. The forest management plans is also a planning document. And this will be written to, once if we get into, we've got the designation, the forest management plan, then we'll dial in what we can do in different areas. How do we want to manage that forest in pieces, parts, or in the whole? And it gives a little more definition as to how things are going to be done for the forest. The 5-year schedule of timber sales, that's a list of sales that comes out every 2 years with areas that are proposed for timber sales. And that also has public process and public comment. And those are just proposed areas. That doesn't necessarily mean that sale will be there. Best interest finding is what we file. This is a decision document that we put together that then the state decides, is it in the best interest for us to sell this timber? Is it going to pencil out to be at least break even or profitable? And with that comes the forest land use plan, which is that down, it is the actual how this harvest is going to happen. Where are the streams to be buffered? How is the road going to be laid out? So this is the nuts and bolts that gets into how it's harvested, how it's reforested. And the 2 decision documents are appealable documents. So the public gets comment on all of them, and the public can appeal those 2. Location considerations. So I mentioned the Kenai area plan. The map kind of shows a large overview of what the Kenai area plan covers, and the different land classifications within that are everything that's in the list: forest, agricultural, grazing, heritage resources, reserved use. The ones we're looking at for potential to be included for a state forest would be forest designated lands and resource management designated lands. So those would be the ones that have the existence of resources and how we can do it. All land classifications are based on resource values and management intent, and through this planning process, lands are identified for general use, forestry, settlement, recreation, habitat, and more. And the area plan does not create a state forest. It just provides a starting point for evaluating which lands might be appropriate to be included. So what lands are going to be considered for a state forest? Potential consideration, as I said before, forest classified lands and resource management classified lands. And what we would not consider would be the state parks, habitat management areas, and other legislatively designated areas. And we also are looking at, with the state, with the forest classified lands and the resource management classified lands, we're looking at areas where we focused on forest management previously. And when we get into the slides, we'll explain, and you'll see in the colors where the areas we're discussing that. So why these lands? As I said, they're evaluated based on existing forest classification, past timber activity, site productivity. Some of them have an existing harvest history. Others have lost mature timber to beetle kill or insect outbreak, but remain productive sites for future growth that we want to reforest and rebuild the forest within. So this evaluation looks forward, not just for what the forest is today, but what it could become over the next 50 to 100 years. And a state forest designation would secure these lands long-term so they can remain managed as a working forest landscape. So this is the overall general map of the Kenai, and we'll have some blow-up sections here in a few minutes. And just to be aware, the gray area is state land. It doesn't necessarily mean that is what we put up for inclusion or would put up for inclusion. We're just letting you know the location of all the state lands on the peninsula. The red lands are resource management classification lands. So that is one of the areas that if it does have forest, it could be considered. It doesn't necessarily mean it will be considered. And then the ones in dark green are forest surface classification, and the ones with light green are the timber sales or past, present, and planned, or also have silviculture treatments on them. So for the Lower Peninsula, this is just a little bit of a better look. And as you can see, we have legislatively designated areas in the hash mark areas. Those would not be considered. And some of these areas that have resource management surface classification don't have trees in them and may not support trees. So though, that kind of thing would be on a case-by-case basis. And this isn't a situation, this is an area where we definitely need public comment. If we reach the point where the public wants to move forward with this and we put together a proposal, we will once again seek public comment on this is what we think should be included. Do you agree? Do you want to not include ones and for what reason? Or do you want to add others and for what reason? So the public will have a say in each step of this process. And here's the upper end of the peninsula, Lower Clam Gulch. That's the old Falls Creek area where we had a lot of timber harvest back. And then so a lot of silviculture, a lot of replanting has been done in there, and the new growth in there is looking really, really nice. But it's still only about 30 years old. It's still got a long ways to go. And then on Seward, there was a lot of discussion in Seward on the large block down here on the right, the general management and the forest management. And there were concerns about that. We heard their concerns. We acknowledged their concerns. And another example is the resource management section, the little sliver just above Seward there. That's the Exit Glacier corridor. And so even though that's a resource management classification, that most likely would not be included in a state forest. So things can be excluded. The public can let us know that, and we can continue to collect that data. So what happens next? As we said, there is no active proposal at this time. It all depends on the public input. So we're here to share information and listen, and we're gathering feedback to understand whether there's interest and support for the Kenai Peninsula State Forest. And all input received during the scoping will help the division determine whether work should proceed towards a legislative proposal in the future. And if it is based on public and stakeholder feedback, and the concept appears viable and supported, the next step would be the proposal development for consideration by the Alaska Legislature. The only body authorized to create a state forest is the legislature. So if there isn't support or if priorities indicate a different path, that'll be reflected in the next steps as well. All right, and so that's the end of our presentation, and we'll turn it over to Lily to field some questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Diane. I think so. I know that that slide just had some information on how to leave a public comment, but we'll make sure that all of that is shared in the chat and also available on our website. So moving into the next period, this will be a time for questions and answers and for a public comment opportunity. Again, I do just need to state that comments shared during this meeting will be recorded as official public comment. So we're still also going to continue accepting written public comment after the meeting tonight through 5 p.m. January 16th. So this can be sent in by email or mail to stateforest@alaska.gov. For tonight, just to make sure that everybody gets a chance to participate, we're going to try and keep a 3-minute time limit per speaker. For those of you joining the on the Teams app, if you just want to use the raise hand function, and then when it's your turn to comment, I'll call in your name and then I can activate your mic so that you'll be able to unmute and speak. And then if you are dialing in on a phone, you can use *5 to raise your hand. and then we'll be able to activate your mic. So if you're on Teams, again, go ahead and use that raise hand function and I'll start working through the list. And then if you're calling in on a phone and you have a question to ask or a comment that you'd like to leave, you can press *5 to raise your hand and we'll see that you are trying to ask a question or speak. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead. I see Dawn Magnus, and I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. So I'll go ahead and enable your microphone. Okay, Dawn,
Hello.
you should be able to
Can you,
unmute. Hello.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a couple questions, and I'm curious about the land use of the lands that would be transferred to forestry in this proposal. And I've heard of them, a lot of them are, I think, Department of Mining and Waters. And I was just curious what some trade-offs would be. Like, for instance, in forestry, would the lands be less likely to be transferred into private holdership in the future, or private land holding? And then my second question is about the legislative process. And I'm wondering, like the other state forests that have been established, do special purposes get placed, I'm kind of asking about, can we emphasize parts of the multiple use, for instance, like protecting snowmobile trail connectivity or something like that? Could those assurances be packaged into the legislative process if we move forward?
Okay, Geneva or Diane, do either of you guys want to take one of those questions?
Sure, this is Geneva Preston. I'm the forest planner for the Division of Forestry and Fire Protection. So your first question, Dawn, was about the likelihood of conveyance of lands into another ownership. So one of the primary appeals of legislatively designating a state forest is that those lands within the state forest would not be available for subdivision or conveyance to another owner. So they would remain in state ownership as long as the legislative designation exists. And that would benefit us by like creating more trust in the investments that an operator or the division might put into those lands for forest management. And your second question was regarding like special purposes or emphasizing other uses in the state forests that currently exist. I do know that some of the state forests that exist currently, like the Tanana Valley State Forest, has an added management goal of maintaining sustainable game populations. And the Haines State Forest is created under different enabling legislation than the other state forests in our system. So it has a little bit more specificity to the goals, but I won't get too much into those specifics because it's categorized under different laws, if that makes sense. And one thing that I'll emphasize just in terms of your example about snow machine trail connectivity, but in other management plans for existing state forests, one of the policies that is written into the long-term management strategy is to maintain access to existing trail systems. So forest activities that are planned in those areas are required to maintain access to the trails that already exist in those areas. Does that address some of the questions you were thinking of?
Yeah, it did. And it's one of, yeah, that did. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. All right, and then I see Matt Beauregard has their hand raised. I'm going to go ahead and enable your mic. Matt, if you should be able to unmute now.
Oh, sorry. There we go. All right. Hi. So I have a few questions. So my first question is like, kind of going at it from ground zero, like what is the overall purpose? Like why are things not okay as is? Specifically some of the smaller chunks within Homer, Ninilchik, and Anchor Point. Like, what would be the purpose? I can understand some of the bigger areas that the desires to be managed have roadways going through them, but how do they look at some of these areas and go, oh yeah, that's worth it. It's the system as is not good enough with it just being DNR land and, ATV trails going throughout. So that's my first question is just sort of like, why are things not okay as is? And what would be the purpose of doing some of the really small chunks that, are kind of people's like playgrounds in their backyard? Like for example, off Chaycock Road on North Fork, I see there's a little red highlighted section there and it's just so small. It just seems like, the trouble seems more than it's worth. So that's my first question. Second is, so what is the relationship with this effort to SB, I think it's SB 48, the state bill, where, there's carbon offsets for some of these corporations and, their goal is to essentially long-term lock them down so that they can offset some of their, fossil fuel uses and basically designate this as a way to do that. And, we've seen it happen before where something gets fenced or gated and, it's just a kind of a bait and switch. And so I'm curious what the just frank association is with that bill. And then my third question is, how can this be stopped? Like if we as residents of Anchor Point, Homer, Ninilchik, Kenai Peninsula, just plain and simple, don't want it. I know a lot of the farmers and ranchers don't want it. And if you looked at any of the Facebook activity, the posts, the feedback, the comments, there's a lot of people who are very against this. And so I'm curious, like, what is our path to stopping this? Like, is that even a possibility that we can say no? Just keep things how they are. So those are my three questions. Thank you for listening.
Yep. Thank you so much, Matt, for your questions. I may need you to go back and repeat some of them since there were multiple, but I can go ahead and answer that last one in terms of, how can you voice your opinion? How can community members, residents, farmers voice their opinion? You are able to share a comment now in this meeting that would be recorded as testimony. We can get through the Q&A and see if there's any just general comments that folks would like to leave. So you can do that after, if other attendees have additional questions we need to get through, and then you can go back and leave your comment. And if you do not want to do that tonight, you can submit written comment. I am sharing my screen right now. That's talking about how to, let your voice be heard. So you can submit a written comment letting us know what you think about the idea of establishing a state forest on the Kenai Peninsula, either via email to stateforest@alaska.gov or by mail. You can send that to Alaska Division of Forestry and Fire Protection at 550 West 7th Avenue, Suite 1450 in Anchorage. And so these will all get compiled into the record. So really right now there's no proposal. So when you say, how can we stop this? Like there's no proposal, we're just asking for input. Okay, and then if you could go back and, maybe just recap your first question, and then we'll see if like Diane or Geneva or Greg can respond.
Yeah. So the first question was, what is the purpose overall? Like what prompted this? Why are things not okay as is? Specifically for some of the, just generally speaking, I'm curious about that. But then more specifically, like what would be the purpose on some of the smaller chunks that, you're not going to get many logs out of. They're basically muskeg, or what are they called? Like scrub pines that just things don't grow very tall there. And access is already very difficult. So just curious what's the purpose of this? Why aren't things okay as is? And what would be the purpose of smaller chunks? And then the second question was the
Okay.
relationship to SB 48.
Okay.
I can take
Diane,
that
I
first
see you.
question. Yep.
Great.
So yes, things can go as they are right now. I'll address the smaller chunk portion first. And just because they were showing up red or green on the map doesn't mean that we are interested in them or that we've said that we want to have them. We've put those on there because that shows where in the Kenai plan those designations are. So all of those designations for general management, that shows in the red. All the stuff that is forest use shows in the green. The light green shows where we've actually done work. So, and we had the same discussion over in Seward. Just because it's on the map doesn't mean it's being included or that it's being considered. And as we also said, if it's something that you feel strongly about, you could say, no, that section should not be done. And, that is the comment that could get it removed if we needed to do work in there. But if there is no trees, we're probably not going to do it. If it's a muskeg, it's probably not going to get replanted. So the example was up there so that people could see we really don't have a lot of areas that we're looking at. It's not like we're going to take over the entire peninsula with a state forest. And why can't we stay the way we are now? We definitely can. We can still run our timber sales. We can still do what we need to do. We can still reforest. The only issue is that takes a lot of money, a lot of energy, and there's no guarantee that that work is ever going to pay off for a forest. The state lands are managed under Division of Mining, Land and Water, our permitting entity for all of state lands. And when the Kenai plan comes up for review, and I don't know when that will be, it was written in 2001, and they're working on older plans right now that were written like in the 80s. But when that designation plan comes up again for review, they can change the designation of lands, and they can change the designation of lands from forest to settlement to agriculture to anything else, which means the work we did is now becoming something else. And if they change it to settlement, that means that could be sold to outside interest. It could be sold to the public. It could become gated off and reduce access. So that would stop any forest work in that area as well. So that's one of the reasons we want to go with a state forest, is to put it in state control for a long, long time so that we can help build the industry and reproduce the trees and keep a forest on the peninsula without having to worry about a redesignation.
And so how does current DNR land protect against those, like private sales or it getting split off in the future? Like, because that was always my assumption, was that DNR land was permanently designated in the same fashion you're saying that state park would be.
No, not necessarily. DNR land is managed by the section of Mining, Land and Water, as I said, the permitting section. And when the plan was written, Mining, Land and Water was the one who helped and went through all of the designations and said, this area is used for recreation, this area is used for forest, this area is used for this, that, and the other. And that's how these plans come together, along with public input, but that's where the designations are. So if you're ever looking in the plan or you're looking at things and you see something's designated as settlement, but there's nothing there, that just means in the future they can put a subdivision in there. And we can have a timber sale in there. They will definitely allow us to do that. And it makes it more likely that we've built a road, so now they can put their subdivision in there. We've given them an access. So it's just, there's more guarantee of keeping the public land public. And I'm not saying they're going to sell all the state land out from under anybody. I'm just saying that is a potential with what we've got now. We don't own the land. We don't manage the land continually. It's Mining, Land and Water that does.
Thank you. And then, that last question was just about, if you guys could speak to the bill, the SB 48, and just kind of the relationship to this effort to that.
Okay, I guess I can take that. This is the reasoning behind doing this is not tied into carbon projects. Like there's no active or, there's no carbon projects in the works that for state land that we're aware of. This is truly, so in 2012, there was the Timber Jobs Task Force that was commissioned under Governor Parnell. That was a big workload, a ton of research done. And one of the main recommendations that came out from that task force was to establish more state forests in Alaska. One of those being a Kenai Peninsula State Forest. So that is, somewhat the inception of this idea, and then followed by, just recent beetle outbreaks, recent wildfires on the Kenai Peninsula. There is a desire, at the Division of Forestry as well as at DNR to just help enable more active management to try and help kind of rebuild and re-strengthen that forest canopy, as well as try and reestablish and support local small industry on the peninsula. So that's really the kind of initiative behind this.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much, Matt, for your questions. All right. Okay, so let's see. I see another hand raised. It's okay, the 480 number. I'm gonna go ahead and enable your mic. Okay, so I did enable your mic, and now if you hit *6, you should be unmuted and able to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Hi. I was under the impression that there would be a meeting in the Homer area that would not be a virtual, that would be an in-person. Is that still something that's on the table, or is that no longer happening?
Yep, we are trying to work on scheduling that. We just it's getting close to the holidays here, and we have some staff going on leave and whatnot, but we're trying to get something scheduled, and we'll hopefully be announcing that maybe next week, but we are working on it.
Okay, and is there anything that you feel might be coming new between now and what you get from the other meetings and having one in Homer? I'm specifically interested in the Caribou Lakes area, and like the other person, very interested in knowing what like land rights we have now and what land rights, how they might change. And are we inviting, there's already plenty of people back in the Caribou Lakes area, and are we just inviting increased logging, increased roads, increased hunting, increased everything else in a place that's already busting with people?
Yeah, so if you're talking about the Caribou Hills area, that we did speak at length about that, and we have heard obviously loud and clear at length about that from the public since these meetings were announced. The Caribou Hills, I believe, is actually classified as recreation, and there's already a management plan that exists for recreation for those areas. And so if we did get overwhelmingly, positive feedback on this idea of establishing a state forest and went to, proceed to the next step, which would be putting together a state forest proposal that would be looking at specific areas to include that Caribou Hills area, it wouldn't make sense to include it really because it's classified as best use recreation. There's already an existing management plan, and we've heard loud and clear from the public that there would be no interest in having that be a part of a state forest proposal.
Okay, so thank you for that. And just going back to something that was shared earlier, with the
Mhm.
state forest saying if you put it in the state forest, then it can't, you know, go to some other entity. Is there any worry about this recreation area being whatever sold off, divided off for some other entity reason or proposal?
I mean, not anymore. So I think that's just when you're talking about an area plan and that process of, you know, public and agency vetting and going through and trying to determine the best use for each, you know, section of land. That's just a possibility. And I maybe Geneva, if you want to take that as a forest planner in terms of like the likelihood of that, or why we're even talking about that as a potential future possibility for not the Caribou Hills specifically, but just general state lands.
Yeah, this is Geneva Preston again, the forest planner. I don't know that I'd be able to speak in much detail to the specifics of the Caribou Hills recreation area because that's not it's not like a project and it's not a use that the Division of Forestry and Fire Protection has authority to make any decisions about. So without looking at the state records for kind of like who does manage those lands and what the goal is officially in writing, I can't speak to what like a speculated future for that site would be, but if that was like a process that someone was thinking about, a public process would also be involved in making that kind of change. And I think before state land can be in a position where it's conveyed outside of state ownership, it would need to be classified in a way that would allow that. So it would need to be changed from DNR calling it recreation land to DNR calling it settlement land, which again would involve like months and months of public process. So I can't speak to what the management intentions of other divisions are, but I do know that if that was something someone was planning, you would certainly hear about it. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, and I appreciate it.
Okay, great.
Okay, thanks, Geneva, and thank you for your question. Okay, so I see a hand up. Okay, so it's 907-773-1656. I'm going to go ahead and enable your mic. You should be able to unmute now by pressing *6.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, thank you. This is a very interesting presentation. But as to the person who talked about SB 48, the carbon credit bill, I brought this up with Division of Forestry before, and nobody seems to know much about it. But the governor, another part of DNR, another division, is looking at the possibility for the Kenai Peninsula, for South Central in general, and the Susitna Valley, and the Tanana and Haines State Forest for a carbon credit program. But they're actually focusing more on the Tanana State Forest right now, and before they get to the others. So that is kind of a possibility, and I think that should be considered in a state forest process. So that's one thing. And then the only other thing I would say is, what is your current timber inventory? I mean, when was the last current? What is your forest inventory? Is it like recently, or it seems to me that you can't move forward with the idea of a state forest proposal if you don't have a recent timber inventory for the forestry designated lands. Thank you.
Diane, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yes, we do have a current or a updated forest inventory, and I believe it is online on the public it was a study done by Terra Verde in 2024. And they were contracted to basically look at all of the forested state lands on the Kenai Peninsula. And then they have sent us the data on everything from sizes, sapling to pole to saw timber, and species and type. So we do have that report, and I believe it is available to the public on the website.
So, Terra Verde, are they doing the carbon capture thing? I can't remember the consultants that are working on it. Is that the same people that are doing that for the carbon credit program?
I believe they started doing that carbon credit study after they completed our resource inventory. But the carbon
Okay, well,
credits was
that's
not
awesome.
part of our, yeah, the carbon credits was not part of what we contracted them to do.
Okay, well, that's awesome that you have a recent forest inventory. Kudos for you guys getting that done.
Thank you. And then in terms of, you know, the possibility of carbon projects on a state forest, that is true. I mean, the Tanana Valley State Forest Plan was recently updated, and that is carbon projects are, you know, newly, and Geneva, jump in if I'm getting the verbiage wrong, but newly, you know, kind of named as an allowable use on that state forest. So that is true. But in terms of like, you know, that bill initiating the desire to establish more state forests in the state of Alaska, that's, you know, that was kind of what I was speaking to earlier. It's a much earlier project and process and desire than that.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Geneva again, forest planner. I'll just elaborate that in our existing state forests, in order for a carbon offset project to be proposed, the management plan needs to cite carbon offset management as a potential use. But on state lands outside of a state forest, as far as I'm aware, it's possible for, I believe it's a DNR Office of Project Management and Permitting. I'll have to refresh my memory on the acronym, but the office that does manage the carbon offset program could propose or facilitate a carbon offset project on any state-owned land. And it wouldn't necessarily be specifically focused on forest activities or forestry activities.
Thanks,
Great,
Geneva.
that's new information. New information, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. All right. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? We could even shift into, you know, if folks just have a comment that they would like to leave for the record, we could, you know, move into that portion. Matt, I see your hand up again. Your mic should still be enabled, so you can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thank you. So one other quick question, and then I do have a comment, but I'll let others go first. Is just, you know, what portion of this effort is related to just overall kind of like tourism and ease of access for, you know, activities for, you know, people outside of the state or people visiting, even people from Anchorage coming down, you know, like with moose hunting or whatever. I just wonder because, you know, with fishing, like we have obviously a lot of tourism, and you've got situations where like residents, like I live on North Fork Road in Acre Point, and you know, I live right on the North Fork River, and we're not allowed to fish anything out of there pretty much. And then you've got these people, tourists downstream, you know, on the proper Anchor River, near the bridge, who are able to fish and keep fish. And, you know, it's sort of like, what's the difference in who keeps what if we just happen to be further upstream? Like the fish, the goal seems to be to let the fish get upstream to lay their eggs. And so what I'm curious about is like what part of this effort is just acknowledged to be to increase access for people to get in there deeper. There's other things like just if you listen to, talk to wardens and stuff about hunting and just old timers who lived up in the Anchorage area, Palmer, whatever, you used to be able to step off the road and hunt moose. And now you got to go 6 miles in kind of to find one in many cases. So I just kind of wonder like if that's a consideration of the sort of like overall effects of our resources in providing more access, and if that is a goal to provide more access for tourism, quite frankly, to increase commerce in the area.
Diane, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. It's not a goal to increase the tourism. The goal is for timber and reforestation and the multi-use. Will tourism come? Possibly. But we're not punching roads in so that we can get, more tourists back in there to hunt, fish, whatever. And it's a possibility it could happen. That is not an intent for us. And actually right now, state lands are open to everybody. So if there's already an access that people are using, the tourists can come use those access because state land is open to everybody. But no, we're not intending to make the access easier for them.
Okay, yeah, just like the difference between, I'm sure you're probably familiar with like Oil Well Road, Wiesel, all those roads off of the highway, kind of Ninilchik area, where there's parking lots and large gravel roads. You get a lot of trucks, trailers, people, big amounts of cars parking versus, some of these smaller roads, Totem Pole Road, for example, like you've got your locals going on ATVs, and it seems like very A to B that when you make a big gravel road and parking areas and turnaround areas that you get people parking and coming from far and wide to use that. And so it seems like there's a relationship between the roads needed for logging in many cases and big machines and what follows. So, I just was kind of, and you seem obviously aware of, like you said, it can follow, but that's not the intent. So thank you for answering that question.
Okay, thank you, Matt, for your question. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Just for those of you that are on the call that haven't gotten to ask a question, or, we can even just shift in and open it up. If folks, you don't need to ask us a question if you, have input on whether or not you would like to see this move forward, feel free to just leave us that comment and we'll make sure it gets added to the record for this. So in order to raise your hand so I can enable your mic. If you're on the Teams app, you can use that raise hand function up at the top of your screen. And then again, if you've called in on a phone, you just need to press *5 to raise your hand, and then I can activate your mic. Okay, and just if you are still, kind of processing this information, have more questions, and just want to continue thinking about this, again, you are still able to submit a comment at a later date, all the way up through January 16th. So you don't need to, leave a comment verbally tonight. You're more than welcome. And we would appreciate it if you would submit comment in writing at a later date if you don't feel ready to submit one tonight. Okay, Matt, I see your hand raised. You should be able to
Yeah,
unmute.
just for general comment feedback. So, that 4,000 acres of DNR land, between North Fork and Sterling Highway, like like it as is, would like to keep it as is. I don't want to see any more. I mean, there are no formal roads punched through there, but given that it is muskeg with a few outcroppings of trees, I would like to see that stay the way it is. Same thing with the Chaycock DNR area between, I think it's Tall Tree and Chaycock, kind of the area between there, and a Nikolaev-esque area, everything kind of around North Fork. I hunt, and I speak to a lot of people who hunt and farm in that area, and we value very much how everything is right now, where there's not much parking for people to come and come in from Anchorage and try and hunt a moose. It is difficult to get out there on your ATV, and it requires some bravery to know, am I going to get stuck? Am I going to fall into some water? And it keeps a lot of people out. So I very much value the way things are in the North Fork area, and also Totem Pole Road and Caribou Hills. All these areas, there's something romantic about knowing how hard it is to get out there, and it being treacherous, and something that you can work your way up to as somebody who hasn't explored all of it yet. And I think too, I'm from California, and Northern California, where there's logging galore, and Sierra Pacific Industries owns every other lot, and it's a network of road hunters at all times. You are not going to find a deer right off the road, and even if you go in deep, they are all hunted out. So I just don't want to see our future become anything like some of these lower 48 states, where logging interests take hold, and all of a sudden you've got access, but you also don't have the resources anymore, and the romance of it being wild and sort of virgin lands to a degree. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Matt.
I'm seeing a question that's dropped in the chat here, and I think maybe some of the folks that were facilitating the meetings earlier this week will be better able to respond to it than I can. But one of the attendees asks, to this point, how much public interest and support has there been to establish a Kenai Peninsula forest?
Yeah, I have not been able to get through. I've been, in 4 public meetings so far this week. So the first was in Nilchik on Monday, Soldotna Tuesday, Seward Wednesday, and then virtual with you all tonight. So it's been a busy week. We've received probably 150 written comments so far that I have not been able to get through. And in the in-person public meetings, I would say that there is, mixed support. So some folks do think it's a good idea and are, interested in seeing it happen, and some folks just don't want to see anything change as is in the area. So it's hard to quantify it right now since we're early in the process, but we've received mixed support. We've heard very loud and clear from, the Caribou Hills users that they, that's very much desired to not ever be turned into state forest. And yes, as I kind of stated previously, that would not be considered, since it's a recreation use area. Sorry that that's probably somewhat general to that question, but it's been mixed. Okay, maybe give a last call to see if anybody has any questions or just comment that they'd like to leave on this idea of a proposal. So again, if you're on the Teams app, you can use that raise hand function and we'll see that you're hoping to speak. And then if you're calling in on a phone, you can press *5 to raise your hand. Okay. Well, thank you everybody tonight who called in, dialed in. We really appreciate your participation and engagement. And you know, please know, as I've said a few times, that we are still looking for and accepting written public comment. Those can be submitted via email to stateforests@alaska.gov or mailed in. That address is on the screen. That's the Anchorage mailing address. We'll be accepting written comments through January 16th. This meeting recording will be available and shared online, so we'll try and get it on that project website, links that Geneva dropped in the chat, and available for others to view maybe early next week. We'll also be adding the presentation slides that we shared with you tonight to that website, so that will be available to download or just click through as well on the website. All right. Oh, and I see some typing in the chat.
Yeah, we had an additional question in the chat about
Okay.
whether or not leasing is possible on a state forest. And the short answer is it's possible as long as that doesn't conflict with the primary purpose that's defined for the state forest when the state forest is created. And that generally I don't see it often, but it is possible.
Okay. Thanks, Geneva. Okay, so again, thank you everybody for engaging with this. We are really looking for comment and input from communities on the Kenai Peninsula to see whether or not there's interest in moving to the next step, which would be starting to create a proposal. So this is very early stages, very beginning of the conversation, and we just really appreciate everybody's engagement. We'll get the resources shared with you tonight available online. And for the attendee that was asking about additional meetings, we'll be looking to schedule something, and we'll announce if there's a new meeting added sometime next week. All right, thanks everybody for attending, and thanks very much, Diane and Geneva, for helping with questions.